So far, in our build out of our sample employer, we've only used medical and RX plans that have been preloaded in our agency library so that all of the users have access to those plans for whatever employers that they're using. But we also need to know how to create plans on the fly, plans that aren't preloaded in our library. And in this tutorial, we'll walk through how we add a new medical plan as we're working in the dashboard. Now, before we dive in and build out our plan, we need a little context to our case study. So in this case, the employer was working with our budget target of 4% over current. And the backstory on this group is that they were looking to keep their $1,000 deductible buy-up plan. So they were focused on getting a new base plan, and they wanted an HSA option. Now, in order to streamline this for training purposes, we're going to actually build out and use the HSA plan they decided. Now, in a real world, we probably would have multiple proposed options with different HSA offerings. But again, we're going to really focus in on the plan that they selected in this case study. Now, that's important information to have and give some context to the next groups that we're going to build out, because the groups are going to work around those targets we have. We're going to make sure that our plan groups are all around that budget target. They're going to all include the $1,000 buy-up plan, and they're all going to have an HSA option as the base plan. So let's get started building out our $4,000 deductible HSA base plan. So in our plan group, I'm going to click the plus sign to go to the wizard. Now again, as we start pairing medical and RX plans with premiums, it's going to filter these as a shortcut. Very important shortcut when we deal with age-rated plans, not so much with composite-rated. So I'm going to skip and get right back to the wizard. Now, instead of searching for a plan that's already loaded, I'm going to click on Add New Medical Plan. This will give us an opportunity to understand the components that make up a medical plan. Notice that when we add a plan on the fly, we're creating it at the employer level. So this is only going to be a plan that's used for this employer. So the first thing we need to enter is a plan name. And again, since it's only being used for this employer, you can really use whatever you want for the name, whereas plans that we load into the library, we're very careful to follow naming formats, and it's a much stricter process. But since this is only for this employer, you can really name this whatever you want. Now, we're working with a good old traditional $4,000 deductible HDHP plan. No coinsurance, no copays after the deductible. So in terms of a plan name, well, you can use whatever you want. Here's a typical format that we would normally see. When it comes to an HSA plan, we really want that HSA somewhere in the plan name. And we often see A or E preceding that to indicate whether it's an aggregate or embedded deductible. So I'm going to enter A as an aggregate, HSA, and then we're going to go 4,000/100/4,000, representing the in-network deductible, carrier coinsurance, and out-of-pocket maximum. All right, so that is a typical naming format we'll see when creating plans on the fly. Next step is we have to indicate whether or not it's traditional or a qualified HDHP. This is so that we don't allow users to put HSA funding on a non-qualified plan. So since this is an HSA option, we're going to go ahead and click Qualified HDHP. Now the next step is to select the carrier. And in our case, we're working with sample carrier. So I'm going to search and get to sample carrier. And as soon as I select the carrier, we're going to enable these two tabs, in-network and copays. So these are the two tabs of information that are going to hold the benefit information for this medical plan. Now the key is when we look at the in-network, we've got deductible, coinsurance, max out-of-pocket. Now a couple of things. You're going to notice benefit tier here, employee, employee plus one, or employee plus two or more. Many times we'll see that people get confused with enrollment types and say, look, we had 4 enrollment types. Why are there only 3 when we go to create the plan? Well, enrollment types are more about how premium is billed, where benefit tiers really are speaking to how many deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums we might incur, whether we're single or have dependents. So in our case, benefit tier employee is saying, if I'm just covered as an employee, what's my deductible? Now we're storing in-network deductibles, so I'm going to put in the 4,000. I'm going to tab over to coinsurance, and this is another real common mistake when you're first getting started. We want to make sure we're entering the carrier coinsurance. A lot of times your carrier plan description may show the employee coinsurance, but we always want to enter the plan from the carrier coinsurance perspective. So we're going to use 100 for 100% coinsurance. And in our case, the max out-of-pocket is the same as the deductible. Notice, again, that the max out-of-pocket includes the deductible. It's become more typical with ACA-type plans, but if we're using grandfathered plans or older mid-large group plans, there are times where the carrier, how they describe max out-of-pocket, might be different than how we're entering it. So we still see carriers that exclude deductible from what they call a max out-of-pocket. But when we're entering the plan in Dynamis, we always want to make sure that the deductible is included. So in this case, our max out-of-pocket is 4,000. Now the next tier is employee plus one. So it's really asking, if I'm an employee and have one dependent, whether it's a spouse or whether it's a child, what's my potential deductible? Well, in this case, it's going to be 2 times, which would be 8,000, and the max out-of-pocket would be 8,000 as well. And if I'm an employee with 2 or more dependents, that same field is going to be 8,000 as well, since we can have a max of 2 times on an HSA plan. Where it gets a little trickier is where we might have 3 deductibles per family. So sometimes when I see people add a plan on the fly, they're entering it and they only see on their document single and family deductible. So the tendency sometimes is just to go 4,000 for single and then put in 12,000 for family and 12,000 for the family max out of pocket. So the idea is that we're really missing that employee plus one tier, right? If I only have one dependent, I can't hit a $12,000 deductible. So I would need to include my employee plus 2 or more. That's where I would put the 12,000. And then I would need to calculate that employee plus one tier of 8,000. And where that becomes important is when we start adding funding to plans, say an HRA, we're going to calculate how many potential deductibles there are. So if employee plus one has 12,000, we might be overstating an HRA benefit. So again, the key is when we're looking at benefit tiers, when we're creating medical plans, look at it in terms of if I'm just an employee, what's my potential deductible and max out of pocket? If I'm employee plus one, what's my potential deductible and max out of pocket? And if I'm employee plus 2 or more, what's my potential deductible and max out of pocket? So once we have that information complete, we're ready to move on to copays. Now in our case, it's a good old-fashioned HSA option, which really has no copays. So I'm really done with the creation of this plan. Now notice that when we look at this tab, it says copays. So the idea is we look at medical plans as first a deductible coinsurance structure, which all services are covered under, covered services are covered under. But then some of those services get preempted by copays. That's what this is intended to capture. Now notice again, we don't capture every possible copay. Again, we're focusing on those key decision-making points. So the copays that we're going to allow you to enter in are any copays that would occur for primary, specialty, urgent, emergency, outpatient, and inpatient. All right, so the idea is since there are no copays, I'm really done. Everything's covered under deductible and coinsurance. Now, the tendency, I think, in the beginning, sometimes I see people trying to apply how they do things in the spreadsheet to how they do things in Dynamis. And instead of copays, they really look at this like, how is that particular service covered? So sometimes I'll see people that put in covered at 100% after deductible and put those types of notes in. Well, really, that's not the intent. The intent of these notes are to really identify notes around a specific copay. So for instance, if I had a $250 emergency room copay, I could put in waived if admitted or something along that lines, giving a little more additional detail around that copay. All right. But the idea is that we're not filling in the blank for every service. We're just identifying which services are preempted by copays instead of being covered under the deductible coinsurance structure. Now notice we have medical plan notes here. So this gives you an opportunity to add additional information that we may not capture. Maybe it's MRI or CT scan copay. In some markets, we see people entering in their out-of-network deductible coinsurance and max out-of-pocket because we only capture in-network, but we can put the out-of-network benefit synopsis under our notes, and there are certain reports where we'll be able to surface that information. All right, so the key is we're going to create the name, choose the carrier, and then fill out the in-network deductible coinsurance out-of-pocket max and our copays, any notes that we have, and when we're done, we're going to go ahead and click Create. All right, it's going to confirm for us that deductible coinsurance max out-of-pocket, and the next step is going to be able to click Next and then move on to the RX portion of our plan.